For mobility professionals, this is Inside Intertraffic.
Hello again and welcome to more from the world's biggest series of transport events, as today on Inside Intertraffic, it's all about the data. I'm Paul Hutton with another Inside Intertraffic podcast as we keep up with the conversation while we wait for the 23rd to 26th of March next year when we will meet in the Rye. So today my reporter Kevin Boris and I talk data, how traffic information is gathered, how it's understood, and then how it's used as we talk to a provider, a transport modeller, and a city managing the movement of its people and goods.
This is Inside Intertraffic.
If you were listening to one of our earlier podcasts on Inside Intertraffic, you would have heard me chatting to George de Boer of TomTom. He's their global marketing director, and we were talking about how we were going to see each other in Amsterdam. Of course, that date that we have has now been pushed back to the 23rd of March next year. But TomTom have been really, really busy, possibly more than a lot of other companies during the pandemic, by helping out, by understanding what is happening to travel patterns around the world. So I've been joined again by George and also by his colleague Stephanie Leonard, who is a traffic advisor at TomTom, and both of them join me now on Inside Intertraffic. And George, first of all, just remind people how TomTom gather the data that is used to power our sat-navs and sat-navs around the world.
We've been working on traffic for a long time already. So when we started introducing navigation devices, we saw that there was a lack of information we could really use on an integrated digital device. So we started looking at, okay, how can we make it so it works on really not only for one country or for major roads. We wanted to have a solution that could help people throughout their whole complete journey from A to B, so also on the minor roads. And that's when we came up with a couple of professors from Germany, but also from Scotland, that were working on technology where you could use floating car data, devices in cars that would send their location on a regular basis. And then we could see, okay, how fast would they be traveling in between those locations, and that we could measure their speed. And with that, of course, we could see, okay, is this a normal highway speed or is this a jam? So nowadays we do that, especially with GPS devices. So in the early days, we also started with something else, which was more based on phones and cellular information. Now it's really focused on every kind of GPS device that gives us that information is used. So that could be our own navigation devices that are sold separately in stores. That could be our phone apps. That could also be the in-dash navigation in cars that we provide to a lot of car manufacturers. It could also be one of our partners. So, for example, the enterprise customers like Uber or other companies that share the information and also then consume our information. And that allows us to have now access to more than 600 million devices that give information, and that allows us to really get a really good look at, okay, what is the traffic doing? And especially in locations where that matters.
Well, I'm trying to remember whether it was 2009 or 2010 that I first visited your head office in Amsterdam and saw what you do with the data and how you analyze it and share it. And already then you had a large amount of historic data. So you've got well over a decade of historic data. So Stephanie, with your analysis, what have you been able to learn about the changes in travel patterns?
Yeah, so every year we publish the TomTom Traffic Index, which is a basic kind of overview of the state of traffic all around the world. This year was the 9th year that we've done that. So basically on the TomTom Traffic website, for each of the 450 cities that we have as part of the index, you can actually see the last 24 hours of traffic in one view, and a second view you can see the last week of traffic, and we compare that to the 2019 average. So basically every year that we do the traffic index, our data gets more rich, gets more accurate, gets more robust. And what we've been able to observe the past few months is actually that for the past, let's say, as soon as the lockdown measures were announced at the start of March for some countries and cities and mid-March for others, the traffic dropped significantly straight away. So, in cities like London, which is the second most congested city in the UK, at mid-morning, let's say 9 o'clock peak rush hour, you were hitting congestion rates, what we call 60%, meaning drivers would need 60% more time to complete their journey. And that almost always dropped to about 15%. We saw similar patterns in Rome, we saw similar patterns in other European cities. And more or less for all the weeks afterwards, the traffic congestion stayed pretty stable. You were looking at rates of maybe 10-15% in the rush hour in the morning and the evening. The only city I would say that had an exception was Madrid, where they astonishingly had a complete flat line throughout the entire day. So regardless if it was peak rush hour in the morning or the evening, mid-afternoon, it was a flat 4% throughout the whole day. And that was really the only city where we saw that. In other cities, you did see and observe a slight peak of traffic in the morning when you would have rush hour, then it would go down, a little bit of a peak in the evening. And then we started seeing ever so slightly increases city by city. So we're talking 1%, 3% extra time on the road. So now that the lockdown measures are actually being relaxed, we're starting to see a slight increase in traffic. And of course, the bigger question now is, where's this going to go in the future? Is it going to go back to 2019 straight away? Is it going to have a significant change over time? We'll have to see.
I was talking to a civil servant working on transport here in the UK, and he described the travel levels as he looks at them almost as like a temperature gauge in his car, that as long as they're low enough, they can vary a little bit, but what he's looking for is if they start to rise significantly, then he knows he has to think about it. Otherwise, it's kind of just one less thing he has to worry about. Is that how you're finding people are using it? Yeah,
so a lot of the press are actually reporting our traffic figures almost on a daily basis. I think George will know the figures more than me, but hundreds of news outlets from all around the world are referring to the traffic index to kind of give an overview of how much people are moving. And actually in the past few weeks, we saw that some press were actually, let's say, putting out reports that traffic was increasing significantly. And we were actually saying, no, if you look at our index, the increase is actually marginal. But you're right. I mean, it's normal, let's say, to have a slight increase of 1-3%. Once we start seeing, let's say, 15-20% increases, I think that's when policymakers might start to look at the data and then think, do I need to act on this? Do I need to maybe change something?
It's funny you talk about journalists not quite understanding percentages. I'm a journalist, but my degree was in maths, and so I majored in statistics. And it really annoys me when people don't understand percentage changes. George, tell me, if I were a local authority or a national authority, what would I need to do to get hold of your data, and how would you be able to help me to actually understand it and act upon it?
For ages, we've been allowing governments to have access to the data, but we revamped it recently by making it even more easier. So we've created a portal. It's called the Move portal. You can find it under move.tomtom.com. And there we've allowed easy tooling for governments to log in and to create an account, also to have a look around. So with a free trial to see what the data is about, and they can really make this historic analysis. But next to that, we also have, for the developers of those companies or their IT consultants, we have a lot of APIs. So they don't necessarily need to use our user interface, but they can also get the data through the modern ways of the internet directly into their tooling. So maybe they're using some other software tools where they can combine it with their own data, and there they can get that data as well to see what's going on. And of course, and Stephanie can tell a bit more about that. We're publishing a lot of that on a dedicated webpage right now as well to give us some insights in that data.
One thing that we've actually changed to the traffic index website is that when you click on the city that you want to observe the mobility patterns, you click on the last 7 days tab, and you're going to see basically all the days of the week, the different percentage levels on the left-hand side, and then the time of the day. And then you just scroll the browser over the congestion level, and basically you see the average figure of congestion in 2019, the previous week's congestion figure, and then the live congestion figure. And now in one simple view, you also get to see last week's average as well, which is interesting now that lockdown measures are being eased, because you can see if there's been a significant increase already at the glance of the button, just by viewing the new TomTom Traffic Index website.
Stephanie Leonard is a traffic advisor and George de Boer is Global Marketing Director at TomTom. And the website that George mentioned is move.tomtom.com. You've been doing great stuff. You've been proving that transport technology delivers so effectively in an emergency. George and Stephanie, thanks very much for joining us on Inside Intertraffic.
This is Inside Intertraffic.
Don't forget that these podcasts aren't the only way you can keep up to date with key messages from Intertraffic at the moment. We've also got a series of webinars, one of which on the 14th of July is hosted by me as we talk about sustainable mobility. Join me for that live at 2 o'clock Central European time on the 14th. And if you're listening to this podcast after it's taken place, don't worry, you can watch it back on the Intertraffic website, intertraffic.com/webinars. And on there you'll find a previous webinar that included some discussion about data with Paul Spears, Global Head of Pre-Sales at PTV. And Kevin Boris caught up with him to find out what you do with the data once you have it. And they started their discussion by talking about modelling border crossings during the coronavirus crisis.
We noticed that when pandemic started to spread across Europe, various countries were starting to enforce lockdown measures, including the closing or restriction of movement through borders. We noticed that there was significant queuing times at the border control crossing points, particularly between Poland and Germany, up to 20 hours. And for the supply chain, this really is quite serious. Perishable goods and also goods in urgent need coming through that border control point. So we teamed up with some data suppliers who were tracking this to map and provide real-time information to the trucking industry so that they could plan their routes to avoid the long queues, because there were other crossings that had shorter times. So this helped the trucking industry map and route more effectively.
So in terms of monitoring flow, but are you monitoring compliance of restrictions as well? How are you doing that?
Using cell phone data, we mapped the movement of people across the whole of Germany. So we have a transport model that covers the entire German network. And we were able to map the movement of vehicles. And we compared a typical COVID-19 day with 2019 flows. And we showed that traffic flows dropped by more than 70% across the whole country, which shows the degree of compliance in Germany at that time. It also showed in the southeast of Germany over 80% drop in traffic flows. There's a stronger enforcement and stronger restrictions in the southeast of Germany, and this was clearly shown on our mapping. We also did a very small exercise comparing Easter Sunday with the previous Sunday, which showed a slight increase in travel patterns, maybe showing that people wanted to visit family and friends, a bit more activity. But what it did show is that activity was very short distance, no long distance driving at all. Interesting as that is, what it can be used for now is to monitor the flows as restrictions are eased and to see if those flows creep up too high or not. So we can start to understand how trying to bring economy back online can affect the movement of people. And of course, we don't want people to move too much because we want to still be in that containment.
How can you use the information that you've got and the traffic data you've got over the last couple of months, the compliance and the border crossings and all that kind of stuff? How can you use that to help cities and regions come out of lockdown in a safe way?
I think at the moment, we're just trying to highlight that we can map how countries can come back to some kind of normality. And as the restrictions are eased, whether it's too fast, we're moving people too much, which we're trying to contain. So although we're not engaged with countries or municipalities or governments on this, we are able to provide that sort of information.
Because cities and regions are going to want to know how to do things safely from a traffic perspective and from a pedestrian perspective and from a social distancing perspective. So it's the kind of data that you have, they're going to need that.
Yeah, something else that I've thought about actually, a transport model generally is considering how individuals move and our propensity, our want to move and to make journeys and trips. And we make journeys and trips for different purposes, going to work, going to the shops and so on. And generally in normal circumstances, those pattern of trips are pretty steady and we understand the frequency that we make those trips. Now, of course, we're under a lot of restriction and we can't make those trips in the same frequency that we used to. But our transport models that, let's take London, for instance, those transport models in London are using trip rates for the normal steady state. We could turn those down to much lower levels that represent how we're moving now to set the scene for now, and then start to raise them, turn the dials up on those movements to see how much more activity we generate. So now we're starting to raise the activity of people going to work. And we can map that in our transport models just by turning up the frequency of those trips happening. And we will start to see that how that starts to load the network in terms of volumes of cars and vehicles moving around, but also on public transport systems as well. We've been told to avoid public transport where we can because of the obvious crowding and increase in picking up the virus and spreading it. But if we can understand what the volumes are of people who want to or need to move on public transport, then those operators can start to put some measures in place to control social distancing.
Paul Spears there talking about transport modelling with Kevin Boris. And just a reminder that Paul was one of the guests on the first Intertraffic webinar that was held. You'll find all the webinars and be able to register for the sustainable mobility one I'm hosting next week at intertraffic.com/webinars.
For mobility professionals, this is Inside Intertraffic.
Now, last year in the city of Leuven, to the east of Brussels in Belgium, a citizen science pilot project called TelRaam was set up to collect traffic data. TelRaam relies on low-cost, camera-based automated sensors that are unique in the sense that citizens play a key role in the data collection. Those same citizens have had the benefits of the city using the experiences gained during TelRaam to help them navigate and emerge from lockdown. Kevin caught up with Eli Nomez of the city of Leuven and began by asking him how the city has changed its perspective on traffic data and how to understand it and make changes based upon it.
We're really busy with dealing with all sorts of effects of the crisis, thinking really hard about all kinds of measures that are necessary to take now and in the coming months. The reality of mobility is different at the moment. We need more public space to allow people to keep their social distance from each other. And so that also has its repercussions on how we deal with data and why we collect our data. Before all of this, we were or still are in the middle of a large effort to professionalize our data collecting abilities. We are also very lucky to have a citizen science project called TelRaam, which basically is a project wherein citizens count traffic themselves with a little device they hang on their windows, and that allows us to monitor and analyze a lot more traffic data than we could ever collect ourselves. So that's a great thing. And of course, we now want to shift our focus on some things, some streets, some aspects that are especially relevant now in times of Corona, in times of measures that have to be taken for the COVID situation.
Sorry, in terms of the data that you're collecting, are you finding in the last couple of months that there's different organisations that are asking for your data, or it's basically different customers, where before you had a certain customer base who used your data, or that you sent it to or shared it with? Has that now changed? Are there now different organisations interested in it?
Well, maybe not different organizations, but especially shopkeepers, companies seem now more than ever interested in this data because it's important information for them, of course. Well, it's not new, but it has intensified. Let's put it like that. I think we as a city are more interested in the developments over the coming weeks and months when we are gradually reopening shops, when the situation is returning to some sort of normalcy. We want to monitor that. We want to see, for example, how the proportion of people going by car changes compared to people going by bike. We are also very interested, and that's really crucial, in the shift from public transport to other modes. The government has put restrictions on the use of public transport, and we also think that people will avoid public transport the coming months, even if these restrictions are lifted.
Yeah.
So that will be really interesting and also important to see how these people will shift their mode of transport. And of course, we would like them to use bikes and shared mobility options as much as possible. But that's an important evolution to keep track of.
So for you personally, in your department, what's the next month hold for you in terms of traffic data and analysing it and using it?
Well, we need more public space for all of that. That's something we have to carefully plan, but also we have to constantly monitor that in the important in the relevant streets. So we will be focusing on that the coming weeks. After that, it's like I said, it's especially important to keep track of how the number of people on the streets, of bike users, of bikers, of cars keep evolving, and if we couple that to certain measures we want to take. It's, in a sense, it's of course business as usual, because that's what we are always doing or always want to do. But now there is this sense of urgency, of course, because we need to react very quickly on changes in
Eli Nomez from Leuven there talking to Kevin Boris and rounding off this latest Inside Intertraffic, but we've got plenty more to come between now and when we meet in person next March. I'll see you for our August edition very soon. In the meantime, don't forget the Sustainable Mobility webinar on the 14th of July. Watch it live or catch up afterwards. It's at intertraffic.com, along with lots of other great content for you. Thanks for listening, and Kevin and I will talk to you again soon.
Inside Intertraffic is produced and presented by Paul Hutton and is the official podcast of Intertraffic.